She took a job no one else wanted, caring for a dying, silent old man in a house that looked like it belonged to another time. But what she didn't know was that behind his quiet eyes was a secret that would shake her world, and a fortune that no one, not even she, could have imagined. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. Now let's jump into the story. Hannah Brooks was 28, broke, and just about out of options. Her phone battery was nearly dead, but she didn't have the energy to charge it. It had only been buzzing with more rejection emails, overdue bills, and the occasional text from her former nursing classmates showing off their fancy new hospital badges. Hannah had none of that. No steady job, no family safety net, just her worn-out nursing scrubs, a second-hand stethoscope, and a heavy heart. The job ad she found wasn't even online. It was handwritten, pinned to a faded corkboard at a grocery store she could barely afford to shop at. Live-in caregiver needed, private residence modest pay, apply in person, serious applicants only. Hannah hesitated. It didn't say much, and modest pay wasn't promising, but she was desperate, and being a nurse, no matter how hard the world tried to make her forget that, still meant something to her. She borrowed her roommate Bethany's bike and rode 6 miles to the address written on the ad. The house stood at the end of a gravel road, hidden behind tall, leaning trees. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged. It didn't look like the kind of place people visited, let alone lived. She knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly man in a plaid shirt and worn suspenders. His frame was thin, his back a little hunched, but his eyes, those were sharp, clear, watching. "You're here for the job?" he asked. His voice was low and raspy. "Yes." "I'm Hannah," she replied, trying to sound confident. He didn't ask for a resume. He didn't interview her. He just stepped aside and said, "You start tomorrow, bring your things." And just like that, Hannah moved in. Her room was small, just a narrow bed, a dresser, and a dusty window with no curtain. But it was more than she had before. It was quiet, still, maybe even peaceful. The old man's name was Walter Reed. He didn't talk much. In fact, some days he didn't speak at all. He sat in the same worn armchair by the window, staring out like he was waiting for something, or someone. Hannah did her work without complaint. She cleaned, cooked simple meals, helped him take his medicine. She even brought him library books he never asked for. He hardly responded, but she kept showing up day after day because she couldn't shake the feeling that behind all that silence was someone who hadn't been spoken to in a very long time. Bethany, her roommate, called one night. "You're still there?" she asked, half laughing. "You've become the Grim Reaper's personal assistant. What are you doing, hon?" Hannah sighed. "I'm doing what I can." "But why him? He's not going to change your life." "I'm not trying to change my life," she whispered. "Just his." And then, the black car started showing up. Once a week. Always at the same time. Clean, polished, quiet. A man in a dark suit stepped out, handed Walter a sealed envelope, and left without saying a word. Hannah asked once what was inside, but Walter simply looked at her and locked it away in the drawer of an old wooden desk. She started to notice other things too. A bookshelf full of thick volumes, not about gardening or crossword puzzles, but international finance, global markets, old banking systems, foreign coins in a jar, photographs in a box under the bed, places she'd never seen, faces she didn't recognize. "Have you traveled much?" she asked him one afternoon while folding a blanket over his legs. He looked up, his voice softer than usual. "Once I thought I'd seen the whole world, then I stopped looking." She didn't press him. There was something delicate about Walter, like a piece of paper worn thin by time and folding. The job wasn't glamorous, far from it. Her days were filled with washing clothes by hand, scrubbing bathroom tiles, and reheating soup for a man who sometimes refused to eat. Her bank account still hovered just above zero. And yet, somehow, it felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. One morning, as she helped him into his chair, Walter caught her hand. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Who?" she asked. He didn't answer, just gave her a small, tired smile, the first she had seen. She didn't know why those words stuck in her chest, but they did. Like a note left behind in a pocket, simple but meaningful. No one visited the house, no neighbors stopped by, no friends called Walter. He was a ghost to the world. But to Hannah, he was becoming something more. Not just a patient, not a job, but someone worth caring for. She had no idea who he really was. But she could feel that something was hidden behind his silence, something big, and that something was waiting to be discovered. 2 weeks passed, then 4. The quiet rhythm of the house became part of Hannah's daily life. She knew when the wind would rattle the porch door, when the floorboards in the hallway creaked, and even how many sips it took Walter to finish a glass of water. She moved around the house like it was her own, even though she never quite felt like she belonged. Walter remained silent most of the time, but Hannah didn't mind. She talked anyway. She told him about the stray cat she saw on the porch or the funny way the soup bubbled on the stove. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he just blinked. But sometimes when she thought he wasn't listening at all, he'd surprise her with a quiet word or a soft smile. One afternoon, while changing the sheets, Hannah noticed something strange in the nightstand drawer. Hidden beneath a stack of old receipts and tissues was a tiny notebook. Curious, she flipped it open. Inside were names, dates, city names, Zurich, Dakar, Lisbon, Oslo, and amounts written in neat, tiny numbers. She blinked, confused. The handwriting was Walter's. "What is this?" she whispered. Just then Walter's voice came from behind her, low and calm. "Put it back." She turned around, startled. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with the same unreadable look he always had. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "I was just—" "I know," he replied. "But some things are better left quiet. Until the right time." She placed the notebook back where she found it. He didn't say anything else. That night Hannah couldn't sleep. Her mind spun with questions. The notebook. The foreign coins she'd seen in a jar above the kitchen shelf. The books on global markets. The weekly black car with its silent driver. Nothing added up. Walter wore the same pair of trousers 3 times a week and lived in a house that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. Yet, pieces of his life hinted at something far more complex. She thought about asking again, but each time she looked at him, she held back. There was something in his silence, something heavy, not just grief, not just age, but memory. A few days later, the sleek black car returned. Hannah opened the front door before the driver could knock. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man didn't reply. He simply handed her the usual envelope and walked away. But this time Hannah hesitated before giving it to Walter. "What's in these?" she asked, holding it out. Walter reached for the envelope without meeting her eyes. "Old business. Is guy that what all those books are for? The ones about finance and investment?" she asked. Walter gave a tired smile, the kind that made him look 10 years older. "They're not for me anymore." That night, Hannah found herself staring at the bookshelf again. Dozens of titles, heavy, complicated books. Global financial structures. The history of private banking. African trade routes post-colonialism. She pulled out one at random. Inside the cover was a nameplate. W. Reed, Master. Class 1974. She blinked. So Walter had studied this. Long ago, maybe even taught it. The next day, while helping him into his sweater, she asked gently, "Were you a banker?" He didn't answer. Just looked at her, then out the window. Later that evening, as the sun faded and the living room filled with the soft ticking of the old wall clock, Walter finally spoke. "I wasn't always like this," he said, his voice rough with age. "I used to know things, build things, important things, but it didn't feel important after a while, not when I lost what mattered." Hannah sat beside him on the couch. "What did you lose?" He looked down at his hands. People. Time. Myself. There was a long silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you didn't ask for anything, he said quietly. You came here when no one else would. And you stayed. Hannah didn't know what to say. She placed a blanket over his lap and stayed beside him until he drifted off to sleep. A few days later, she noticed something odd again while doing laundry. Each of Walter's shirts had small, hand-sewn tags inside the collar. They weren't laundry tags, they were written in faded ink. Each one had a city and a year. Copenhagen, 1981. Addis Ababa, 1992. Buenos Aires, 1976. She held up a shirt and walked back into the living room. Walter, what are these? He took the shirt and ran his fingers along the tag. Reminders, he said. Each place was a different chapter. Were you traveling for work? He nodded slowly. For business? For deals? For dreams I thought would make me feel something? Did they? He looked at her with tired, honest eyes. No. The next morning, Hannah woke up to the sound of coughing, harsh, deep, painful. She rushed into Walter's room to find him shaking, his skin pale and clammy. She sat beside him and placed a cool cloth on his forehead. I'm here, she whispered. His hand reached out and gripped hers tightly. You saw me, he said, barely above a whisper. Not what I had, not what I lost, just me. Hannah felt tears well up in her eyes. You're the only one who ever did. Walter Reed passed away just before sunrise. The house was quiet. The birds had not yet begun their morning songs. Hannah stood in his bedroom doorway, holding a tray with oatmeal and tea. But the stillness in the room told her what her heart already feared. His hands were folded gently across his chest, his eyes closed and his face at peace. She placed the tray on the dresser and walked to his side. There was no rush now. No more pills. No more blankets to adjust. No more waiting. Just, goodbye. She sat beside him, held his hand one last time and let the tears fall. Not loud sobs, just silent drops sliding down her cheeks. He had been quiet, complicated, and at times frustrating. But he had become family. Not by blood, not by name, but by something deeper. By the way he watched her when she thought no one did. By the way he listened to her stories even when he didn't speak. By the way he gave her presence a kind of meaning she didn't know she needed. The next 3 days moved slowly. Hannah stayed at the house cleaning, folding his clothes, packing the few items he had. She kept finding more of those tiny tags in his shirts, each with another place, another year. There was something heartbreaking about how carefully he had preserved those memories. Then came the knock. It was the man in the black suit, the same one who always delivered the envelopes. This time, though, he didn't carry one. Instead, he held a single white letter with Hannah's name printed on it. Miss Brooks, he said, handing it to her with a small bow. You are requested to appear at the law offices of Mr. Charles Givens tomorrow at 10 a.m. regarding the final will and estate of Mr. Walter Reed. Hannah stared at the envelope, stunned. Estate? She asked softly. He didn't have an estate. He barely had furniture. But the man simply nodded and walked away. That night, Hannah barely slept. She read the letter over and over, trying to understand what it meant. She had never imagined Walter having any sort of will. She had never seen him sign a check, let alone discuss finances. His life had been simple, almost invisible. What could possibly be left to talk about? Still, the next morning, she went. She wore her cleanest pair of scrubs and tied her hair back neatly. There was no one to ask for advice, so she followed the directions and walked into a tall building downtown. The office of Charles Givens was on the 10th floor behind shiny glass doors and a marble reception desk. Name? The receptionist asked. Hannah Brooks, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes widened. Oh, right this way. She was led into a quiet room with high ceilings and a large wooden desk. Behind it sat a man in a gray suit, white beard, and glasses that rested low on his nose. "Miss Brooks," he said kindly. "I'm Charles Givens. Please have a seat." Hannah sat down slowly. "I don't understand," she said. "Mr. Reed wasn't... well, he didn't have much." Givens smiled gently, as if he had heard those words before. "I understand. But that's not entirely true." He opened a large file on his desk and turned it toward her. "Walter Reed," he began, "was a founding member of multiple private investment firms and banking partnerships across Europe and Africa. Over the years, he operated under several different names and held ownership shares in 9 private banks." Hannah blinked. She thought she misheard him. "I'm sorry. Did you say 9 banks?" "Yes," Givens said with a calm nod. "He kept his name out of the records, stayed in the shadows. But he was one of the most financially powerful men of his generation. Quiet, discreet, and completely off the radar." Hannah felt like the air had left the room. Her heart pounded in her chest. But why? Why live like that? Why the old house, the worn clothes? Givens folded his hands. "That's a question only Walter could have answered. But what I can tell you is this. In his final will, he left everything he had to you." Silence. Not the quiet of confusion, but of disbelief. I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me?" Givens reached into the folder and pulled out a smaller envelope. He handed it to her. The handwriting was neat, careful, unmistakably Walter's. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking. "Dear Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone to rest. I never said much, and I suppose I never really knew how. But I saw you, Hannah. I saw your kindness when the world had forgotten me. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't expect anything. But you gave me peace. That's something I couldn't buy with all the money in the world, so I leave it to you. Not as a reward, not out of guilt, but because I believe you'll know what to do with it. Use it well. Build something better than I ever could." Walter tears blurred Hannah's vision. She looked up at Givens. "This is real?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And your life is about to change." But Hannah didn't feel rich. She didn't feel lucky. She just felt overwhelmed. And one thought kept echoing in her mind. What would I have done if I had known? But then again, she had done everything anyway, without ever knowing. The news spread fast, faster than Hannah could make sense of it. One moment she was a quiet caregiver folding blankets in a forgotten house. The next, she was on the front page of websites and whispered about in coffee shops and offices. People she hadn't spoken to in years reached out with cheerful greetings and not-so-subtle requests. Everyone suddenly remembered how close they had been, but Hannah didn't answer those calls. She didn't move into a mansion. She didn't buy a sports car or take a luxury vacation. Instead, she stayed in Walter's old house for a little while longer. She cooked her own meals, swept the same dusty floor, and sat in his armchair by the window, staring out the same way he had. She needed time. Time to think, to breathe, to feel the weight of what had been placed in her hands. Walter hadn't just given her money. He'd given her a second chance, not just for herself, but for others. She remembered something he had written in that final letter. Use it well. So she did. The first project was simple but powerful. A small community health clinic in the very neighborhood where she had once struggled to pay rent. She called it the Walter Reed Center, but she made sure it didn't look fancy. Just clean, open, and full of people who cared. Then came another. And another. She built clinics in rural towns where medical help had never been close by. She opened support centers for caregivers, offering them fair pay, mental health services, and real appreciation. She created scholarship funds for nursing, students who couldn't afford tuition, students like she had once been. Hannah didn't want to be seen as a hero. She didn't even want her name on most of the buildings. But people noticed. They saw what she was doing, and more importantly, they saw why. Why don't you slow down, Bethany asked one afternoon as they sat on a park bench eating sandwiches. You've done more in a year than most people do in a lifetime. Hannah smiled. I've been given more than most people ever get. I don't want to waste it. Bethany nodded. You're still you, huh? I hope so, Hannah said. She kept one part of her life very private, her relationship with Jonas, the quiet mechanic from 2 streets over. He had once fixed her old bicycle for free when she was struggling and never asked for anything in return. When Walter passed, he was the only one who didn't suddenly treat her like she had changed. He still offered her tea in mismatched mugs and sat with her in silence when the noise of the world became too much. They married quietly. No photographers, no news stories. Just a garden, a few close friends, and the sound of birds overhead. You die? Were the only one who saw me when the world didn't, Hannah had told him. He had smiled and said, then I'll keep seeing you. Always. One day, many months after her life had changed, the black car returned. It parked outside her office, and James, the driver who had once delivered those silent letters, stepped out. He looked a little older, a little softer. I was asked to give you this, he said, handing her a final envelope. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Dear Hannah, if you're reading this, it means you've done what I never could. Built something that matters, not in numbers, but in hearts. I didn't leave you everything because I thought you needed it. I left it because I hoped you'd remind the world of what matters most. Kindness. Thank you for showing me what it means to be seen even when I didn't ask for it. You didn't just care for a dying man. You gave him back his dignity. That's something no bank account can buy. Live well, and give the world what you gave, me hope. With all my respect, Walter. Hannah folded the letter gently and placed it in a small wooden box in her office. She didn't lock it away. She kept it there within reach to remind her on the hard days why she did what she did. Years passed, and the world kept turning. But wherever there was a clinic helping a single mother or a nurse getting her first paycheck with full benefits or a student walking into a classroom with a scholarship in her name, Walter's legacy lived on, and so did Hannah's. One sunny afternoon, she stood in front of a crowd gathered at the opening of a new youth center. Laughter echoed behind her. Families filled the park. Balloons danced in the breeze. She stepped up to the microphone and smiled. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice steady. And I didn't earn it in the way most people think. All I did was care for a man the world had forgotten. I didn't know who he really was. I didn't expect anything in return. But maybe that's the point. She looked out at the faces, young and old, rich and poor, and her heart felt full. Kindness is free, she said. But sometimes it gives you everything. She stepped back as the crowd clapped, not just for her, but for what she stood for. And somewhere, maybe far away, maybe just in spirit, Walter Reed was smiling too.